Welcome, everyone. We still have a few people trailing in here, but you find yourself in the unique successes of West Virginia trails and how we can replicate. So we're going to hear from three different folks, three different panelists here, and they're going to outline their success and why it was unique. If you can advance. Oh, and this session is sponsored by Beckley Office of Outdoor Recreation and Economic Development. They're brand new and they are taking on a bunch of stuff around Beckley. So reach out to Corey Lilly if you're interested in learning more. And advance, thanks. We have Owen Mulkeen first, Frank Jorgensen, and Brianna Schell is gonna wrap it up. So Owen's with the Friends of the Cheat, and he's a trail connoisseur of all sorts of ways. So he takes a bigger perspective, outdoor recreation in general. Frank Jorgensen's with Bright Enterprises, and he's gonna talk about some of the opportunities for private companies to capitalize on trails. And then we have Brianna Schell, who's with the City of Huntington with some alternative transportation and working with different partners along the way. So with that, I'm gonna pass it over to Owen to get started here.
All right. Thanks, Nathan. Welcome to the West Virginia Trail Conference. Again, my name is Owen Mulkeen. I'm the Associate Director at Friends of the Cheat. And today, with Unique Successes, we're going to kind of talk about how restoration and recreation kind of overlap to form some successes for Preston County and specifically the Cheat River. So again, kind of to give you some reference to what is the Cheat River and where is the Cheat River. The Cheat River is up in here in the northeast corner. It kind of starts, the headwaters start at the Cheat Mountain, kind of in the Potomac Highlands, and then flows north and it kind of hits the border of Pennsylvania and West Virginia at Cheat Lake, and then ultimately meets the Mon River, which then flows to Pittsburgh. And as we all know, onto the Great Mississippi Basin and into the Gulf of Mexico. So we're kind of on the continental divide here between the Potomac drainage and the western drainage of that. So just a quick reference on where we're at in the world. And again, Friends of the Cheat, we have 6 full-time staff. We have 1 part-time bookkeeper. We have a large board of 12 people. And we're pretty excited about next year. We have a pretty large budget of $3.5 million. And most of that is construction contracts for trails, rail trail and a trailhead, and we'll talk about that more in a bit. And again, the history of the Cheat River is kind of largely impacted by legacy coal mining. Here is a good shot of kind of before restoration, the lower part of the Cheat, which would be basically below Rollsburg towards Cheat Lake. And here you can kind of see the heavy impacts from acid mine drainage. And that's kind of how our organization got our start. And again, kind of point you to the map here, kind of flowing again from south to north. And you can just kind of see the highlights of the amount of abandoned mine lands in the Cheat River, over 340 abandoned mine lands, and leads to some of the legacy issues that Friends of the Cheat has been battling, you know, from mainly acid mine drainage. And here's a good shot of some of the issues we're facing. This is the Lick Run portals, kind of a nexus where we're talking about recreation and trails, but here they're dewatering a mine. Kind of the impacts of AMD on a river. You can see kind of the sediment and the sludge that's produced, and kind of issues that we're battling. This is a reclaimed high wall, kind of that same pictures I just showed of where they were dewatering. This is a reclamation project that happened, and we're going to be kind of sending people here to as a park. Part of our rail trail is sending people to see the reclamation efforts. And then this is kind of a showing what we do when we do water treatment. So we hope to have some future water treatments at Lick Run, but this is another site in another drainage, North Fork of the Greens Run, where we actually build treatment systems. So again, reclamation and recreation, we're going to get there and on to the good parts. So additionally, we do reclamation projects like those water treatment systems, but we also have a recreation river access program. New last year, we started a campground, and at that campground is kind of host to a couple of things. First is the Cheat River Festival. It's also our outdoor classroom where we do outdoor education. It's also access for the Cheat Canyon Whitewater section and trailhead for the Allegheny Trail. And really, a great part about the Cheat River is this kind of wild area in the Cheat Canyon. It was recently protected in 2013. Really world-class whitewater run, class 4 whitewater run, 10 miles through a pretty steep canyon. And we are kind of the stewards of the canyon and the trails within the canyon. So additionally, we also maintain accesses along the river. And part of that is the Cheat Canyon, but also the Big Sandy, which flows into the Cheat River, one of the largest watersheds of the Cheat River. And we have a large whitewater access campaign where we get donations from individuals to upkeep this, do road work, and really just maintain access for boaters. Here we have another part of some other programs. We have Garrett Richardson, who is one of our monitoring technicians, actually doing bacteria monitoring at one of the sites and we post our results on Swim Guide to let folks know, how safe is the water for recreational use. And some other good shots of big old fish that retired DNR biologist Frank Jernasik here, showing you that the Cheat is alive and well with some good fish in it. Again, kind of that nexus into the Allegheny Trail, into the Cheat Canyon. We have a great partnership with the West Virginia Scenic Trails Association, where we host trail maintenance days, where we maintain the 10 miles of trail through the Cheat Canyon WMA. This is the second one we did this year. We're going to continue to host this with this group. It's a weekend kind of a trail maintenance day. We host them at the campground, free camping, and you get to just explore the trail and camp out. Additionally, we also host groups, service learning projects with the university, West Virginia University. There's a group of our, the students coming in and kind of replacing, building a turnpike and a tread over some pretty wet areas. And we do this every year. Again, more maintenance days on the trail. We also host students at our outdoor classroom. Again, kind of teaching them about the issues in, the watershed, as well as giving them kind of, right here, we're doing a tree plaques throughout the classroom, identifying trees. We also host kind of Outdoor Explorer programs where we're teaching more youth-based programs about science and water quality. Here we're doing a fish shocking with some West Virginia students, finding fish in one of our impacted streams, just again, getting folks out in the watershed, teaching them about water quality and fun things you can find. Kind of on that same vein, we also have water quality measurements where we're actually installing gauges here. We have a gauge on Muddy Creek, which does water level sensors that boaters use to see if rivers are running, and also for the DEP to see what the water quality is, what the pH, what the conductivity is. So kind of, again, two user groups, people using this gauge for river levels and other people using it for science. Kind of moving on, again, we host the Cheat River Festival. This is our biggest fundraiser of the year, really highlights, the river's history. We'll be doing it again in May 2022, bringing it back live and in person. You can volunteer, again, getting more people into the tribe of the Friends of the Cheat. You can volunteer and become a volunteer at the festival. We host a downriver race that people, again, the largest downriver race, mass start downriver race. Just another cool aspect of getting people on the river and utilizing that resource. We also have the Upper Cheat Water Trail. This is more, flat water paddling. We were helped with, there's 9 access points. We were influential with that, working with private landowners in DNR to get this below Parsons to Rollsburg. And we, again, highlighting partnerships with that. We partner with the West Virginia Land Trust. We do a snorkel event. During that event where we meet the Cheat, we invite the public out, rent them kayaks, boats, canoes, to just really meet the river. And again, moving on to Rails Trails, which is our big new project. Again, that nexus, we have AML funding from the DEP to develop a trailhead for our rail trail. And this here is below the Cheat Narrows section, which is a class 3 whitewater section, where we'll have ample parking and a pavilion to people to take off the river, be able to have like a park-like atmosphere, but also to really join the rail trail, which would be 8 miles of rail trail, which we're going to be building next year. So we have 2 projects for next year, both tied to that AML fund with our Lick Run project, our Lick Run portals that I showed earlier in the presentation about education, kind of a learning center, showing people the impacts the AMLs have to water quality. And right here, project we're pretty proud of is going to be this 8 miles of rail trail along the river, and really going to, showcase the Cheat River very intimately. This is a trestle bridge that we're going to be rehabbing. It's a 400-foot trestle bridge. A lot of things going on with that bridge. Happy to entertain questions about rail trail building. And we're also, again, hosting service projects with this. We're bringing students out, bringing groups out, doing the maintenance. Here they were clearing some Japanese knotweed, and just like prepping for the construction of it next year. So a lot going on, and we're hoping to have a functional rail trail next year along with a functional trailhead. And again, kind of that highlighting the nexus between our history in reclamation and environmental remediation, and how the funding streams can kind of cross over into economic development, where you can build infrastructure and use that infrastructure to educate and promote our organization, and also just like the natural qualities of the Cheat River. So yeah, some additional information. Be sure to check out cheatfest.org for next Cheat Fest in May 2022. And you can find us also on Facebook at Friends of the Cheat. All right.
Thanks, Owen. You all have a lot going on. I look at Friends of the Cheat and I see all these spikes coming out. It's like, oh, I'm education. I also do water quality, and here's some outdoor recreation and camping, a little bit of everything. So it's great to get an overview. I'm going to have some questions for you to follow up on later on, but great presentation. Sure. Thank you. Next up, we have Frank. And Frank, I will share my screen, and you can just tell me when to.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, go ahead. If you can rotate that one?
That might be out of my technical abilities.
Okay.
Everyone could just cut
that's okay.
To the left.
No, that's okay. That's okay. First of all, Bright Enterprises, we're a family office out of Summersville, and we're a real diverse, eclectic collection of different businesses. And so we're probably somewhat unique. We're more entrepreneurial focused. So for example, in tourism, we own Winter Place Ski Resort. We owned for 15 years Glade Springs Resort. We're still owners in the rafting company Adventures on the Gorge. And we had about 110 miles of railroad that we've had for 40 years, going from Gilmer to Gassaway. And at Gassaway, it joins the Elk River and follows the Elk River south all the way to Clendenin. So that's a distance of over 90 miles. And then we also own the Buffalo Creek and Gully Railroad, which went from Clay to Wyden and connected with our Elk River line. So in meeting with the governor's office and with tourism, Chelsea Ruby, we recognized that a railroad, when you think about it, in a typical conversion of rails to trails, the railroad removes all the steel, all the ties, and all of the ballast, which is the stone underneath the rail and the ties. And we recognize that to build a proper trail, you really needed that stone and ballast. And so we got to thinking, why is it that it has to be a two-step process where we take up everything and then just sell the state or whatever entity the underlying dirt, and then they have to struggle to figure out how to clear the brush, how to put back in stone. And as a railroad, we already do clearing of brush. We do maintenance of ditches, and we do maintenance of slips and slides and culverts. So we basically, in discussion with the state, said, look, we will, instead of pulling up all the stone, we'll just finish it as a trail and not even sell it to you until it's finished. And so that's what we're doing. And the governor announced this project in the spring of 2019. We opened the first 10 miles from Duck to Ivydale in the summer of 2020. And as we sit here now, we have 28 miles fully open. You can go to the next slide. And instead of seeing a railroad with ties and everything, we took the existing bridges, and there were quite a few of them. We decked them in a way that it would support 80,000 pounds because we wanted it to support a triaxle fully loaded for maintenance. You know, in the event of floods or something major, they need to get heavy equipment in, but also to allow for the passage of emergency vehicles, ambulance, police, fire trucks, and so forth. Next slide. And we had a contractor who was unique to all of this, based out of Beckley, American Electric. It's an old company that started repairing mining equipment. And since that time, they do all of the trail maintenance, the internet, the cell towers at the Bechtel Reserve Scout Camp in Fayette County. And it's a contractor that's done work for us at Winter Place for 20 years and so forth. So we had total trust. And just when you look at the surface, we met with and visited other rail trails in West Virginia. And the state parks kind of told us what they liked, what they didn't like. And one of the key things was the final surface is using limestone sand, which is put down and then compacted with rollers. Now that's after you have a good stone base underneath, which we left in place instead of removing it. And we did all the proper, ditching and replaced culverts where necessary. And so that gives a very smooth surface. It's a very durable surface. Even when there are rainstorms, we're amazed at how it doesn't really wash away, and it's very durable. Next slide. The advantage of the way we did this is really speed. We've actually completed now another 10 miles to Frametown, and there'll be a ribbon cutting on that fairly soon. So that gives a total of 38 miles of finished trails. The other thing, we learned is you have to educate the public, because there's a sense on a rail trail, people want to go with their four-wheelers and so forth. And so through the use of signage and barriers, and then policing by the DNR, you finally get people to understand that you're not allowed to have motorized vehicles other than Class 1 e-bikes. And that's another little tidbit that we've learned, because there are Class 2 and Class 3 e-bikes, and the last two go up to 28 miles an hour. One has a throttle, so it's more like a motorbike. And you just have to understand that Class 1 is the one that is pedal assist, and it only goes to 20 miles an hour. You do allow horseback, and in most areas, you're allowed to have carriages behind the horseback also. Next slide. The other thing we learned that is so important is to get public support. And so before we started the project, we had gotten over 70 letters of support, generally from public officials and local citizens groups. We had the complete support of the Division of Tourism, Chelsea Ruby, of the leadership speaker, Roger Hanshaw, Senator Capito, Senator Manchin, big supporters. And this is just to show how the terrain varies. You have on the uphill side, you often have rock sort of outcrops or rock cliffs, where when the railroad was constructed in the late 1800s, they blasted and cut away the rock to form a bench. you can't see it, you can barely see it, but the Elk River is on the left. And so the unique feature of the Elk River Trail is they call it a 2-for-1, where you have the river and you have the rail trail. Next slide. The other thing is the state decided to acquire the 18-mile-long Buffalo Creek and Gully Railroad from us, which is a historic railroad. It was the last steam operating railroad in the nation. And this is with Speaker Roger Hanshaw and Senator Capito. It was an event where we had transferred title of the Buffalo Creek and Gully Railroad, and we had done it as a railroad to a railroad. In other words, we did not remove the rails. There is a trail alongside, so that's a rails with trails. But here you can kind of see an overview of, in the northern part of Braxton County, where Senator Capito's finger is Gilmer. And then you go through most of Braxton County, all of Clay County, and then you enter Kanawha County and you go on to Clendenin. Next slide. And Senator Capito and Speaker Hanshaw have just been big champions. There had been a rail bike study several years earlier in which they identified the Buffalo Creek and Gully Railroad as a potential candidate for the use of self-pedal rail carts. And that's why the decision was made not to remove the rail on that segment. And it's pretty unusual to end up with a railroad that has a trail alongside, but that you can also have other recreational use of the rails, including small motorized vehicles. And it gives flexibility for the use of rail buses, perhaps in the winter time and so forth. Next slide. So this is really an iconic project. The town of Clendenin will probably become the largest trailhead. Someday Gasaway may rival it as a trailhead. But the town of Clendenin, they commissioned a study by E.L. Robinson to work out the best way to construct the trailhead there. And so that project is now moving forward. Funding has been secured through Terrell Ellis working with the Kanawha County Commission and so forth. And that work is starting shortly. Next slide. The other thing that I think is important is to have a big vision for your rail project. And what I'm describing here, we control about 110 miles, 114 miles that we know we can basically deliver. We believe that we can be helpful in securing rail access on into Charleston, including a section from Blue Creek to Sanderson. We also believe that we can be helpful in extending the trail from Gilmer to Burnsville. And we'd like to see how we could tie in and the opportunities by following generally river areas to get the trail even up to Pittsburgh someday. So right now, we're saying we believe this can be 160 miles. It would be might be the longest rail trail east of the Mississippi. It would certainly be in the top 3 or 4 because there are many projects taking place in the East Coast that are looking to extend, including the trail going from Maine to Florida, which is an exciting project, may take 20 years to complete, but I believe it will get completed. I do believe that it's important to voice a big vision. And I do think there might be opportunities in the future for kind of public-private type partnerships where additional rail trails are done in a similar way, where before they are purchased by the state or the entity, that they get converted to a trail because the person that owns it and does the conversion they already have the equipment, they already do certain maintenance, and it just makes sense to do that instead of needlessly pulling up stone, for example, and hauling it away, and then you just need to turn around and bring it back in under another owner. That's all.
Thank you, Frank. Appreciate it. We brought Frank in here because we came together as a group, the West Virginia Trail Group, last year, and we were wondering who is this? What is this Elk River Rail Trail? I mean, no one really heard what was happening. We were trying to like figure it out, and all we knew it was happening very quickly. So whatever you all were doing, you were doing it right. So, but it was great to get an overview there. Next up, we have Bree Shell, and I'm going to pass it off to her to share her screen.
All right. Thank you all so much for having me. I'm going to be talking about a journey that we've been on to make improvements to the state route in Huntington called Hal Greer Boulevard. And you may be thinking, let me get my slide advanced here. Why are we talking about a state highway during West Virginia Trails Conference? So what I'm hopeful to argue today is that we should be connecting these cross-state trail systems with our urban and rural street networks as much as possible for the tourism or economic development potential, which we've talked about, but more significantly, because we need to make these roads safer for and more accessible for those who need to travel by bike, foot, or transit out of necessity. So today I'm going to be sharing with you the case study of this Hal Greer Boulevard Complete Street project to include the history of the roadway and how and why that was important to the success of it being built the way it is today, the bike and pedestrian and safety elements that are going to be included within the new roadway to be built, and the funding and planning process that came together to bring this thing to construction come 2022. And finally, a little bit into the future plans of what we have to continue this momentum down the roadway. For just a brief moment, I'm going to highlight this word that I'm using, complete streets, in case you are not familiar with it. It is a term that was coined by Smart Growth America, and encourage you to check them out if you're interested in learning more. Basically, the concept is to really think about roadway design as the entire right of way in order to prioritize safer and slower speeds for all people who use the roadway, and not just high speeds for motor vehicles. There's some examples here on the slide, and I also encourage you to be on the lookout. We do have a West Virginia statewide Complete Streets Advisory Board, of which I'm a member, and we're looking to do more education and best practices on how this is implemented in West Virginia, so be on the lookout for that. But about our Hal Greer Boulevard, this roadway is actually about 3 miles of a West Virginia state route that runs right through the middle of the city of Huntington, bisecting a neighborhood called Fairfield and kind of connecting major institutions within our community. The roadway is named after this gentleman, Hal Greer, who was the first African-American to play at any public university in the state of West Virginia, and grew up in this neighborhood and attended Marshall University. And what's important about this corridor is, you'll see throughout the process of conversation, is how it kind of manifests in different ways in different sections. Obviously, a key component is the residential neighborhood that it bisects, with housing on either side of the roadway, the institutions that I mentioned, and the different contexts that we'll talk about. I'm going to talk a little bit about the timeline of what has happened in the past on this corridor, but I'm not going to dwell on it. I think the important concept to keep in mind is a state highway through an urban area is complicated, and there are conflicts that have occurred over the years, from items such as congestion, which prompted a roadway expansion, to fatalities and horrendous, things that have happened, and loss of life. And so we've also looked at this roadway in terms of an urban trail system that we have, and how do we connect safely across it. And we've looked at particular intersections or lighting or stormwater impacts. And so I don't mention all of these various studies to disparage the work that was put into them or the process that was done. But I think what we found in retrospect was that looking at this corridor in these small segments was not as productive as looking at it more holistically and being able to come to the Division of Highways and work with them as a partner to say, how do we make changes across the corridor as a whole? So that really brings us to the Complete Streets Corridor Management Plan that was initiated around 2018 with the Division of Highways in partnership with the City of Huntington and our Cuyahoga Metropolitan Planning Organization. So this process really started strong with the goal that you see here on the screen. The goal was to promote connectivity and safety for all modes of transportation, and including thinking about economic development and connectivity as a gateway to the City of Huntington. And so we really operated with that as a framework for leading how we wanted to redesign this roadway. Again, I'm not going to dwell on the aspects of the public engagement of this process, but I think it's important to keep in mind that as we were doing this corridor management plan and creating this concept of the roadway from the full extent of the roadway, we were already in plans to prioritize the actual construction phase of this project. And so we needed this concept plan to run the whole corridor, to have this robust public engagement process and engage all these people and what was working and holistically and kind of combine all these past studies. But we also initiated, our funding for actual construction level design documents. So that way we could quickly move from this public engagement to funding of the construction of the design. So what kind of elements do we have in this roadway? I want to highlight just a few items of the streetscape improvements, primarily enhanced crosswalks all throughout the corridor, including mid-block crossings. We have really long blocks here, and we are finding people were crossing mid-block in very dangerous ways because they didn't want to walk all the way to a protected intersection. And so by putting in select medians and kind of breaking up traffic, we were able to provide safe mid-block crossings and also control traffic patterns. So it wasn't left turns and right turns anyway throughout the corridor to reduce points of conflict between vehicles and pedestrians and cyclists. We also had improved lighting. So not just roadway lighting, but pedestrian scaled lighting. So similar to what you may see in a downtown, runs the entire corridor with this improvement. And we also have enhanced pedestrian and cycling amenities, which kind of manifested themselves differently in the different phases of the roadway, which we're going to get into. I've brought this up a few times, but there are kind of three different phases of the roadway improvements. The first phase being between the Marshall University campus and the underpass, which does have a little bit lower traffic volumes and increased pedestrian and cycling traction because of the university. We have the second phase between the underpass and Washington Boulevard, which is kind of this neighborhood, Fairfield, and kind of institutions at Marshall University and Cabell Huntington. And then we have the more highway kind of zone where we are looking at the section between Washington Boulevard all the way out even past the I-64 interchange for Huntington High School. And there's a high school just beyond that intersection as well. So again, I'm not going to go into all of the streetscaping elements here, but one that I wanted to highlight was a new one for us, which is on this first phase, we actually have incorporated a two-way cycle track, which is a bike lane going two ways on one side of the street that's protected by a parking strip in this section by the Marshall University campus. So that added elements of parking and also a protected bike facility for that increased use of cycling and pedestrians in this area. In the second phase, we had elements of the roadway maintained a lot of its width with protected medians in certain locations, but we have a larger side path on one side of the street where pedestrians and cyclists can intermix and kind of share the road safely and not be in as high of the traffic volumes that we had in this section of the roadway. And then we have, again, this like third and final section, which is definitely the most kind of highway looking section for the city of Huntington, not as dense development. And so in this particular section, we prioritize a side path away from the road, and even more so than this image, we are showing, we have even more of a separation of distance between the travel lanes and the side path in order to provide a safe passage for pedestrians and cyclists. And that trail section with enhanced lighting will go up to kind of that first circle you see there, which is a commercial park, that kind of an industrial park, which has some amenities that we wanted to make sure people could get to. Not quite as far as the high school, but we do have some other amenities that were part of the planning process that hopefully will get us there at some point. So the corridor management plan also envisioned elements like parks and economic development along the roadway, not currently phased as part of this construction, but is something we're seeking to find funding for as well. So briefly, I do want to go over how this process kind of came to fruition after all of these planning efforts. The corridor management plan really transitioned very quickly into construction level documents for all three phases based on the concepts that you see here in this corridor management plan, with some tweaks, of course, once you get on the ground, but very closely aligned to the corridor management plan because of the robust public engagement process. We also accounted for the first phases of 1 and 2 for construction as part of this initial kind of transition from the concept plan. Those are partnerships with the federal surface transportation block grant funds. So we have an 80 federal with a 20% local match. And we are seeking funds, actually working with our congressional delegation to try to find funding for that phase 3 to quickly transition into funding that phase 3 construction, as well as the Gateway Park. So all of that to say that I hope you come away from this case study thinking that roadways are trails too, and they're not just there to get us through, but to safely connect people from all different walks of life to our unique places in West Virginia. So thank you.
Thanks, Bree. That's definitely the message that we were trying to drive home for your presentation in particular. Thank you for the overview. I'm going to ask all the panelists to turn on their camera as we go into Q&A mode here. We have a few popping up in the chats. There's some dialogue happening, and I'm going to show my rail trail ignorance here with some of my with my question, but I'm going to do my best. So Frank, one of the big questions is, I guess some of the nonprofits, when they enter into these rail banking processes, there's voluntary remediation that happens. What kind of standards and remediation did Bright have to do in order to transfer to the government in the future?
Yeah. Okay, you know, our contractor is someone who works closely with the DEP because part of what he does as his general business is remediation. In the case of the sections that we have completed, these are sections that in one case, there are 6 miles that hasn't had any rail traffic on it for over 50 years. On all the other sections, there hasn't been rail traffic for about 24 years. And so as a result, and none of these sections had yards or repair facilities or maintenance or anything. The coal was actually loaded on the Buffalo Creek and Golly Railroad, which is still a railroad and was transferred as a railroad to the West Virginia Rail Maintenance Authority as a railroad. And that did require STB approval, but that's kind of a cursory transferring one railroad to another railroad. In the case of the 28 miles, which had no yard or loading of coal or anything, there we're still awaiting STB approval for rail banking. And that's pretty, you know, it's generally an expedited process when you haven't had traffic for 2 years. In our case, we haven't had traffic for 22 years. And we're expecting that approval probably any week, maybe even any day. And that includes they're kind of doing audits of, everything from historic and asking all the different agencies, DPs and whatever, as to any concerns or knowledge that they have. And so the railroad, it's amazing, in the flood of 2016, it's pretty remarkable. Here's a railroad constructed in 1895 and not 1 square inch of it was underwater from the flood of 2016. So it does show that it has always existed far enough away from the river, but more importantly, at a higher elevation to where that's not been an issue.
Thank you. And Bree, I was going to ask you, what has been the level of involvement with the Department of Highways? I mean, it is on a state corridor there, so they have to be involved. I'm just curious about the trail side of things.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we recognized very early on this corridor that the Division of Highways wanted the public and the institutions to be kind of in unison with the requests they wanted to see for changes to the roadway, which is part of the reason why I kind of talked through some of that timeline. I think they were willing to make changes as needed when things came up, but wanted to make sure that everybody was kind of on board with what was happening. So I think that's why that corridor management plan really helped us advance very quickly once we had the division's kind of support of, what we wanted to see on the roadway. And again, the administration from Mayor Williams it's been one of his top issues to advance this further. So I think having that local support can, really ask the Division of Highways to kind of think differently about how they may develop a roadway. And it's not just a repaving, it's connectivity through and across. So.
Great. I'm sure the amazing visuals helped as well for everyone to see the vision.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. And Owen, I'm curious if you want to talk about the Trail Authority and kind of the broader vision of Friends of the Cheat in the future in terms of recreation. And you can just say no as well. We can just focus on Friends of the Cheat and its corridor if you want.
Sure. It's something I didn't really hit on in my presentation, but right now I'm the interim executive director for the Mountaineer Trail Network Recreation Authority, which covers 15 counties in the northern part of the state, basically from Wood County up and over to Mon, Preston, over into Mineral County. We're just got some Appalachian Regional Commission funding, over $1 million to further the Trail Authority, bring it up to being recognized, and actually have funding for an executive director, advertising and marketing dollars, website, legal work, basically bringing this non-motorized recreation authority kind of to market and assist in this region, kind of similar to the Hatfield McCoy trails down in the southern part of the state. The Mountaineer Trail Network would be working on non-motorized trail centers, ride areas, rail trails, water trails, equestrian trails in this area. And again, marketing the region, not a specific place, but and again, some funding is available to even enhance areas. An area needs a bathroom, it needs a little bit of trail work to, get the place up to snuff for more tourists to come. Again, back what Chelsea Ruby was saying, a lot of more in-state tourism, out-of-state tourism. This is just an opportunity to work cohesively across multiple counties, not every county going at it alone, trying to get their funding straightened out for their trail project, but kind of bringing counties together to, again, have a collective effort, marketing the region, working on recognized trail areas to, again, boost tourism, but also quality of life for in-state residents.
Great. And just want to recognize that there's also a Mountain State Trail Authority in the New River Gorge area. And I believe there's one that is starting up, or at least the nascent version of one in Southern West Virginia. So these are a good opportunity to pull a lot of folks together across multiple counties. I'm going to ask an open question to everybody. And so once we get into these projects, we get deep into them, whether it's rail trail or active transportation or remediation, education, and outdoor recreation, we kind of see the opportunity everywhere. And I'm curious where you've seen the different opportunities now that you've worked on your projects. And I'm going to let anyone start because y'all are going to say one thing or another. So whoever wants to start can jump in. Unless I have to call him Frank.
You know,
so.
I'll say, I really think the vision of a trail all the way from Burnsville to Charleston is just, will just be phenomenal. And the vast majority of that trail flows along the Elk River. And so as a result, we've already seen that the DNR is installing more and more river access points. We're putting in trailheads so far at Frametown, at Duck, at Ivydale, at Heartland, at Clay. And as we move forward, we'll have trailheads, at Camp Creek, at Queen Shoals, at Clendenin. And as we move forward, Gasaway. The involvement of the communities, the involvement of the political leaders, of all of the tourism, the leadership from Chelsea Ruby. I'm just telling you, this is, it's going to be operated as a state park. I mean, it's just a phenomenal project that, because it runs kind of parallel to Interstate 79, it's going to give access that the Greenbrier River Trail just doesn't have as much convenient access in comparison. And I'd like to see, going beyond the rail trail, I'd like to see if there's a way for us to get this on up to Morgantown, Pittsburgh, and so forth. I just think it would be phenomenal. And then to look south of Charleston, where else could it go?
Frank, just as a quick follow-up, what would be the first steps? And it seems like you had a lot of political will at the state level. I'm just curious what a first step would be for a newer group that's trying to do something similar to what y'all did.
Well, I really think working with Chelsea Ruby and the Division of Tourism is key, because that is a new cabinet secretary level position. She is very enthusiastic about the concept of trails. And so I think there's already support there, but I think the notion of, let's get a vision of where we would like to see in 5, 10, 15, 20 years that the trail networks would go. I'm telling you, for the quality of life and the attraction of people from out of state, they love things like this, because that's something that anyone can do. Anyone can, participate in trails and water trails. And so there's a low barrier to entry for the general public.
Right. I'm afraid we're going to blow up Secretary Ruby's email here. She might get a lot of emails after this conference. Bree, I was going to ask you the same question. Do you see other opportunities for active transportation in different areas?
Yeah, I mean, I guess obviously focus more in the urban, even urban rural context in West Virginia. I mean, I just think we have just a missed opportunity on every street to be thinking, how can we make a connected system for our residents, and our residents to be able to access, whether it be an inner city trail system or these larger like cross trail systems. I mean, connecting to places and kind of making it in Huntington, between Huntington and Charleston. That's really like one of the areas that we originally started our inner trail system, was that concept of just connecting our two metropolitan areas. And we haven't gotten there yet, but I think I've been very focused on our internal stuff with the city of Huntington, just trying to think about ways that we can make it safer for people to walk, bike, and ride in Huntington. So that is a heavy enough lift, but I think we have the roadway network to do it, which is exciting, and we have funding, coming down from our federal partners, even more so in the near future but I think encouraging people to think creatively about what our roadways can do is going to be that that it isn't just roadways for cars, like roadways are for everyone. So I guess that's where my passion lies. So
Absolutely. Walking is definitely the number one form of exercise. So it's good to have that infrastructure, especially close to home, as the CDC says, within 10 minutes would be ideal, or a half mile or so. But yeah, it's definitely a large undertaking across the state. So we appreciate all your effort. And Owen, what successes do you see? I mean, replicating either the abandoned mine lands, or whether it's remediation or water trails, like any component of the Friends of the Cheat, do you see other opportunities across the state?
Most certainly, kind of highlighting on like the reclamation and recreation, thing, the funding, AML is, especially with the infrastructure bill, is poised to get hundreds of millions of dollars per year for such projects. So really, again, I don't want to, there's obviously a need for reclamation of environmental issues. That's something that should happen first. We can't be bringing people to areas that are contaminated or look like a wasteland. We have to restore the natural beauty. And then once you do that, kind of what we're doing here in, Preston County is, restoration, restore the water quality. People will naturally come back, the fish will come back, kind of creating the atmosphere, one of those build it, they will come. Environmental issues are hard, they're long fought battles. There's hopefully more funding for that. Let's see what this infrastructure bill can do. But again, I think also partnering with private landowners, specifically in areas that aren't rich with public lands. We're close to Tucker County, which does have a lot of public lands, but Preston County has a few. But there are large land owning groups or individuals, and some of this new legislation with the Mountaineer Trail Network allows liability to be reduced to those. So like expanding existing trails through private lands is definitely an opportunity for growth. But I would say the biggest thing is connecting two communities. The rail trail that we're building right now, it's kind of an island. It doesn't really connect to the town of Earlsburg or the town of Kingwood properly, but that's the goal. It's like you have a trail, let's get it close to where people live and can use it every day, and use it, and they will give ownership to it, and then they'll take care of it, and it'll become something that they care about.
Thank you. I don't have any pending questions in the chat here, so I would again encourage folks to put your questions for the folks here. I'm curious if the panelists have any questions for each other.
I guess, I'm always interested in costs. These projects are millions of dollars. For example, our trailhead, is over $1 million. We have AML funding, $750,000 for construction. We have a DOH grant that's $250,000 for our bathroom pavilion and a concession stand. Our rail trail, 8 miles. We have over $2 million, and we don't really feel that's enough to even construct 8 miles of trail. We have 8 bridges, a 400-foot long bridge. I mean, the dollars just don't go that far. So I'm interested to hear maybe from the other panelists, like, what is the price tag with your projects?
Go ahead, Bree. I'm going to call on you first.
okay, yeah. So yeah, let me pull up my cheat sheet. I did anticipate us talking a little bit more about funding. So our design phase for the project ended up costing us about $1.5 million. So just for the design of the construction level documents. That did not include right-of-way acquisition, which was another a little over $1 million for right-of-way acquisition, partnering with the Division of Highways. And then we originally had estimated about 7 million for construction of the phase 1 and 2, but that number has increased to around 10 million. So, and we'll see what bids come back as. So I guess what I've learned is it's always more than I think it will be. Thankfully, this federal match 80-20, we've been very lucky with our metropolitan planning organization. If we can come up with the match, they're very willing to support these types of transportation projects that the administration is wanting to make changes on. But I think, the challenge for other transportation projects have been that it takes a really long time to spend those transportation dollars. Thankfully, this project has been very prioritized by our administration and through the Division of Highways. So it's been moving pretty quickly, but I think that's always been the battle with us, is like the cost ever increasing and the time ever slow, especially on roadway projects. I don't know. I mean, maybe trail projects are similar, but our roadway projects tend to take a really long time to get through when you're using those federal dollars. So
Yeah, I was gonna call out, things get a lot more complex in more populated areas. So
Yeah.
and complexity turns into dollar signs, right?
yeah. Mhm. Yeah.
Frank, how about you?
Well, I'll use the example, we've owned Winter Place Ski Resort since 1992. And in all those years, we've done a lot of expansion projects of ponds, additional snowmaking, electrical. And again, because we're private and because we use private contractors, we can move quickly. And I think if there were ski resorts that were publicly owned and treated that way, they would never flourish. They would never make it. And so I guess I'll just use the analogy with our project. We use many of the same contractors that we've used on our railroad over the years, at our ski resort over the years. And so, for example, doing the bridges, again, the contractor we have does the maintenance and all of the bridges at the Bechtel Summit and all of the expansion, many of the expansion projects at Winter Place. And so that's a contractor with, 100+ employees that does a lot of reclamation work, a lot of FEMA work and so forth. And they're nimble, they're private and they're nimble. You still have to follow, all the regulatory hurdles, but there are clearly fewer than if you're a public highway going through an urban area. I mean, to me, that's a nightmare, and I admire what you're doing because I think it's so important. I really do think it's so important to the urban centers. I also want to mention that while I talk about the vision of the trail, say from Pittsburgh to Charleston, at the end of the day, it's similar to the Appalachian Trail. There are only a few thousand people that actually walk the entire length of the trail, but there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands that walk smaller segments. Yeah, I'm a good example. I've done a couple of 50-mile segments as a kid and so forth, but never the whole trail. And so, for example, the segment from Queen Shoals to Clendenin, that's 4 to 5 miles one way, which means it's 8 to 10 miles round trip. That's going to be heavily used by a very local populace. And not many of those people are going to think about going all the way to Charleston eventually, or all the way to Gassaway or Gilmer. So I do think it's important to recognize that on a large vision like that, you're giving a lot of little communities a recreation opportunity that they wouldn't otherwise have.
And recreation turns into public health outcomes, and that turns into dollar signs as well, even outside of tourism. So,
and think about it. If you were living along a railroad, you viewed that as a liability. But now when you're living along a state park, all of a sudden your property values are enhanced and your quality of life is enhanced. And people sort of envy, my gosh, you live next to a trail.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I have one more question for you all before we wrap up. So Owen's been involved with this group for a while, the West Virginia Trail Group, and he can attest that we have been very much building the plane as we fly and kind of working different angles and seeing how things work out. I'm just curious what y'all think a statewide trail group could do for you in the future. So Again, we don't have all the details worked out. You can think of the most ideal, perfect situation. I'm just curious what a collective group at the state level could be doing for you in your local projects. And Owen, since you've been around for a while, I'm going to ask you first.
I think it's needed, it's obviously more present. The need is more present every day. I think it's obviously it's a grassroots effort right now, but I think it's something that needs to be, that go-to group, for example, a smaller group who wants to do some trail stuff, to act as a kind of a library of experience or, connecting people, I think is a big thing. Rail trails have been built in the state for a long time, but each one's different, and having that network of people to tap into is huge, especially, as a trail manager myself, like finding people who have gone through the same problems, who've built trails, built bridges, who've done this, really cuts down on some headaches. So that there is a good reason to have it, just to connect folks, but also, to push our agenda. We know that tourism is a major growing point in West Virginia, and the folks that are doing the infrastructure to build these things, they need to have a voice at the right level. And currently, we're all doing it our own. We're all kind of fighting for our own county, fighting for our own region. We're not collectively gathered and have a collective voice. And I really see that as like the main thing going forward, is like speaking up for like all this work we're doing, building infrastructure. We need the state to jump in and help us and be, meet us where we're at.
Great point. That was one of the impetus for this group of calling around and talking to people.
I'd like to mention, one of.
Sorry, 1 second. I think you're a little delayed. Yeah, having that common language and talking about trail successes in the same way has a more amplifying impact than talking about it slightly different, just for an overall audience that we have. Go ahead, Frank.
Yeah, well, one of the things we learned from the state parks, from Director Stephen McDaniels, from Mark Wiley, from Sam England, was the importance of having a nonprofit foundation that is a supporter specifically of the project that you're working on. And so in the case of the Elk River Trail, that includes 3 full counties. It includes the mayors of, Gassaway, Sutton, Clay, Clendenin, and so forth. The county commissions of 3 counties. And I'm impressed. Ken Tawney is the executive director, and I'm just impressed in a short amount of time how many donations they've gotten of land or structures along the trail, how they've acquired at a low cost, some other locations, and how they've been successful in getting grants and really building public support and political support through the different towns. It's much more powerful than I ever expected. And so, and one of the things the state parks does is they encourage the formation of a private foundation like this for each of their parks. And then they kind of have an umbrella structure. And I think what you're saying is we need to get to a statewide organization where we're all pulling together, we're aware of what's going on, and look for opportunities to support each other and market each other and so forth.
Absolutely. That is definitely the direction. Bree, how about you? What could a statewide group do for you?
Yeah, I think echoing very similarly to what you all have mentioned. I mean, I think as I focus on my narrow world, I'd love a larger umbrella organization to say, here's where you can connect to these agencies that are adjacent to you and have a larger network, as well as just kind of, as you mentioned, Owen, like the education and elevation of like, the Guyandotte Water Trail in Huntington. I'm just like on the smallest awareness of it, but I feel like in its infancy, it could grow to a much larger institution and have better, resources put towards it, learning from examples of institutions like yours that have been around for longer. So I'd love to, pick the brain of what successes and funding you all have to be able to like bring resources that are similar to Huntington and really bridge that larger connection beyond our individual jurisdictions, as well as just educating people on these concepts and elevating kind of like the role of what these systems can do statewide. So I think that is really valuable.
Yep, it's a great direction. I think we have a couple webinars potentially planned over the next year before our, don't hold me to this, but I think we're going to do an October in-person conference next year in 2022. So get ready for that. But otherwise, I really appreciate everyone's time here. And just want to make sure we're not having any last minute questions. No, I appreciate everyone's time here, and I look forward to what all your respective projects are coming up with in the future.